8:47 now. Alabama's morning news. Victoria Churchill joins us now. Who's a young young voices. I'm telling you, it's that third cup of coffee. I shouldn't have done it. Spokesperson, also an expert on Capitol Hill dynamics. Hey, welcome in, Victoria. Glad to have you with me.
Hey, always great to be back on with you. Thanks so much for having me back.
So here we are. The president signed it yesterday. Shutdown is over. Back to normal. Going to take a minute, but I should have done this and forced it long ago. But the Schumer shutdown. Let's talk about what happened here during this whole dynamic here, because, my gosh, it could all happen again. I mean, close to Groundhog Day, we could get up again and have to relive this whole thing at the end of January. So your thoughts on how this whole thing went through the Democrats and they stood their ground for so long?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that the Democrats stood their ground, but in the end, they did cave. So the House passed their version of the budget bill, 222 to 209. So there was a handful of Democrats that sided with Republicans, much like in the Senate. Of course, in the Senate, they had 8 Democrats that sided with Republicans to get over that 60-vote threshold for fiscal legislation, which this, of course, being a budget bill was. And, President Trump signed it just about an hour after it was passed on Capitol Hill. Top Republicans as well as business leaders were in the room in the Oval with him when he signed it. And it was also interesting that he actually commended some left-wing groups and the Democrats that did side with Republicans to pass this. He specifically called out a couple of unions, including the American Federation of Government Employees, as well as the Fraternal Order of Police and groups like the Farm Bureau, for their pressure on Democrats to switch their vote. So that was interesting because he railed against a lot of the things that the Democrats did, but he also did commend some groups that do tend to lean more left. And another thing that was interesting is that he told people to remember this in the midterms because, I would argue, and I think a lot of political experts would say that a lot of people over the past few weeks have actually been blaming Republicans for the shutdown, and that is partially to blame for the election results that we saw just last week in Virginia, of course, California, New Jersey, and New York. And so it's interesting that Trump is bringing that up in an electoral sense because, at least to me, it seems like Republicans haven't actually been using this as a winning issue electorally.
Mm-hmm. Well, in all those votes you're speaking of in the elections that took place, these are blue districts. So I don't think it's the temperature of the rest of the country at this point. In the midterms, I don't think will reflect exactly what took place a couple of weeks ago. Your thoughts on that? I just don't see that happening across the country. I see it happening inside the Democratic Party, getting more fired up. But that Democratic Party is a hot mess. So first of all, your thoughts on how it will reflect the midterms, real or not. And secondly, where is the Democratic Party?
Well, I actually want to tackle your second question first. Where is the Democrat Party? I mean, they're mad. They're fired up. A lot of folks are blaming Schumer. You have groups like Our Revolution that came out against him. College Democrat groups in New York and nationally are calling on Schumer to resign. So they think that he's weak. But this is actually consistent with polling that we've seen over the last few weeks and even months. We did our own polling at the Daily Mail, where I work as a political reporter covering Capitol Hill. We did our own polling on popular figures in the Democrat Party. And Schumer was pretty far down that list, and actually notably, the top leading Democrat figures back when we did this polling in June were actually all celebrities and not even politicians. But, even among politicians, Schumer was outranked by quite a number of Capitol Hill colleagues. So there's definitely been some frustration brewing against Schumer. Democrats got mad at him earlier in the year for siding with Trump on some things. So, I think if you look at the Democrat Party as a whole, they're trying to push this idea of generational change. But what's also interesting to know, and I may be covering this in some future reporting that I'm doing, is that some of these generational changes might actually not be what they seem, because a lot of these districts have people that are running that are actually, I guess for lack of a better term, Nepo babies. So you have a Kennedy heir running in New York. You have Pelosi's daughter running for Congress in California. So, even though these people themselves are younger, I don't know necessarily how much they can relate to the general American public,
right,
given that their lineage is what it is.
So do you think what we saw a couple of weeks ago with the Democratic surge there in these, elections is reflective of where we're going to be in the midterms?
Well, I think it's interesting to note a couple things. So I cover Virginia a lot. I covered it primarily in a couple jobs ago that I had, and I still keep quite close tabs on it because it's where I work. And, to be frank, I am a little bit worried, particularly in some swing districts. Of course, historically, you have midterm swings in swing seats to the party that the president is not of. And of course, that's what we saw in the off year election. But, looking kind of outside of the governor's race and things like that, what we saw in previous elections, and actually particularly in 2024, Kamala Harris actually underperformed Biden in a lot of key Democrat areas. So, for example, even in Virginia, even though she did win the state, she really underperformed historical Democrat performances. But then when you look at those districts, now, unfortunately, we do not have a single Republican representing any area in Northern Virginia. So, that includes places like Loudoun County, where we've had a lot of the school board drama. You guys may have heard about that even in Alabama, because, a lot of that's made national news. So, even districts like that, they actually elected Democrats. And, even other areas down the state, we're looking, for example, Congresswoman Jen Kagan. She's down in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. Of course, that's a very heavy military community. And that community's had both Democrat and Republican representation.
Yeah, so, but I just think the rest of America does not really represent what that part of the country. I used to live in Fairfax, and that Northern Virginia sector is always going to be blue. There are certain sections of the country that will always be what they are, including Alabama red. But I think the general consensus is that, the Democrats are in trouble, and it's going to be reflected in the midterms. Well, you're on top of it, Victoria Churchill. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being with me, and we will do it again.